Howdy folks, how you all doing? Hope you're all having a great day, and welcome back to yet another episode of The Good, the Bad and the Ugly in World of Tanks. Our first replay is brought to you courtesy of Pointy-Haired Jedi, World of Warships community contributor who still occasionally dabbles in World of Tanks every now and then. Today, Pointy-Haired Jedi has the extreme misfortune of finding himself in a Tier 10 battle in his Tier 8 British tank destroyer, the Charioteer. I say great misfortune, but it's not exactly unusual because Tier 10 battles are where Tier 8 tanks live. Although, it's only fair to point out that Wargaming do have plans to tinker with a matchmaker this year, so hopefully this kind of circumstance should be the exception in the future rather than the rule. Now, this battle isn't really about Pointy-Haired Jedi's performance, although he does do as well as he could be expected to under the circumstances. No, in fact, there are two standout moments of comedy in this battle, one at the very beginning and one at the very end. And the one at the very beginning, yep, that is the enemy artillery. Or at least one of them. Yeah, well, I guess he didn't like the matchmaking much either, and he's Tier 9. Well, we're going to skip ahead to some of the more entertaining bits. While we have a quick talk about the Charioteer. It's not a terrible Tier 8 tank destroyer, it certainly retains the excellent ability of the Cromwell upon which it's based. And while you can fit the 105mm L7 gun to the Charioteer here in game, which is an excellent anti-tank gun, no actual production models of the Charioteer were ever built with the 105mm gun. Only one prototype, which exists today at the Tank Museum. Any Charioteers that saw service, mostly in the Middle East and with the British Territorial Army units, were in fact equipped with the quick-firing 20-pounder gun. But even this was really stretching the design limitations of the Cromwell chassis. In order to fit the 20-pounder gun, the turret ring had to be enlarged, and that meant that the turret had to be enlarged too, in order to fit it. Unfortunately, because the 20-pounder gun occupied so much space in even the enlarged turret, it meant a couple of things. First, there was severely limited ammunition stowage available in the turret. Although due to the fact that they couldn't really afford to put any armour on the turret, and the Charioteer's turret could be penetrated by a 50 caliber machine gun, the fact that you couldn't stow a lot of ammunition in there was probably actually a fairly good thing. Of slightly more concern was that because the tank was designed to be operated by a 3-man crew, and because the turret was so crowded with the 20-pounder gun in it and the 2 crewmen in the turret, the commander's visibility while firing the gun was extremely limited. Which meant that a 4th crew member was added as, wait for it, and I'm not making this up, an external observer. Now just think about that for a minute. An external observer. Yes. Yes, really. That meant some poor sucker was required to sit outside the turret during combat, telling the commander where the shots were going. Any volunteers? No, I thought not. David Fletcher really hates this tank, by the way. He did his top 5 worst British tanks video for the Tank Museum. I'll put a link down below in the video description in case you haven't seen it. And the Charioteer came in the number 5 place. According to British tank historian David Fletcher, this is the 5th worst British tank ever produced. And Britain did produce some pretty bad tanks, right? So there's some fairly stiff competition for that title. Nevertheless, the Charioteer made it to number 5. Anyway, we're not here to really talk about the Charioteer. And again, this isn't specifically about Pointy-Haired Jedi's performance in this battle. Although, as I said, he did about as well as you could expect, given that he's a Tier 8, very thinly armoured Tier 8 tank destroyer in a Tier 10 battle. This was about the 2 moments of sublime comedy that occurred during this match. And we've already seen one of them, the light tank / artillery hybrid that suicided right at the beginning of the game. The second one is coming up relatively soon. We just have to wait for Pointy-Haired Jedi to die first. He missed his opportunity there. He did actually manage to get a shot into... Oh, he's never going to survive this. Yes? No? No. Okay. The AMX-30 finishes him off and then gets nuked in return. That leaves just the T-92 artillery against 2 enemy tanks. One of them is an Object 704. The other is an IS-7. Although the IS-7 isn't going to be around for too much longer, because as he crawls around the corner to try to dig the artillery out of his little hidey hole, he gets derped right in the face by the T-92. And that just leaves the Object 704. The Object is obviously anxious to not share the same fate as the IS-7, so he's going to be playing this a little bit smarter. He's correctly anticipated that he's going to be able to get up here before the T-92 can turn the gun around. But the T-92 can see the writing on the wall as well, and so he takes a moderately dangerous cliff dive and is able to escape immediate destruction at the hands of the Object. And now it's a game of cat and mouse. Obviously the Object is trying to bait the T-92 into rushing a shot and missing and then kill him on the reload. Equally obviously the T-92 knows he's only ever going to get one shot here, and he's determined to make sure that that shot is going to connect and do the job. And he's in no rush to fall for that old gag from the Object 704. This stalemate continues for a short while, and then the Object 704 correctly realises that he's never going to get the drop on the T-92, providing the T-92 knows where he is and can see which way he's moving. So he does the smart thing, and he disengages. It sounds obvious, I know, but if the T-92 doesn't know where the Object 704 is, the T-92 can't keep his gun pointing towards him. The Object then raises the stakes by parking himself inside the cap circle, putting the pressure on the T-92 to get in there and kill him before he can finish capping. The T-92, aware that he's probably only going to get one shot here and has to make it count, is in no rush to approach the cap from the obvious direction. And while this is certainly not one of the fastest machines in World of Tanks, the cap counter is giving him enough time to circle all the way around the cap and come from what he hopes is going to be an unexpected direction. It's all going to depend on which way that Object 704 is facing, and given that there is a rather large and obvious rock inside that cap circle, it's likely that he's facing in the other direction, and yes he is. The Object knows he's been spotted, he's gone to brown alert. Is it all over for the Object 704? Well, given the horrifically long aiming time of the T-92, possibly not. Wait, he's taking a bit of a risk here. He's turning around to face him. The T-92 fires and utterly fluffs the shot. That one went into low Earth orbit. Well, the T-92 had one chance and he blew it, because there is no way he is going to reload that gun before the Object 704 is on top of him. And here he comes. This is his moment. And yet somehow he manages to fuck it up. And yet he still could have reloaded the gun and finished off the T-92 before the T-92 had reloaded its next shot. Unfortunately, the 704's cock-up is of greater proportions than we may have first realised, because now they're both stuck. Even though neither of them can actually hit each other, the T-92 could still have won this battle through collision damage if any parts of the hulls of the two tanks involved were actually in contact with each other. He could have won by the simple fact that he has more health remaining than the Object 704, and the Object 704 would have died first. But the only parts of these two machines that are actually in contact are their tracks, and tracks don't do collision damage. So this game is now officially over. Well, unofficially. It'll be officially over in not much longer than a minute, when the match timer runs down and the game ends in a draw for both teams. Our next battle was submitted by Cakebox in the French AMX13-105. And again, as in the pointy-head Jedi submission, this isn't really about him, it's more about some of his teammates. Although he does play a reasonably good battle, until he succumbs to a fatal case of gold poisoning from a TVP T50 player who pretty clearly has more money than sense. But like I said, this particular battle isn't really about Cakebox in the AMX13-105. It's mostly about this guy in the T110E3, although a couple of the artillery players on his team are going to feature in supporting roles. This guy is not being a huge amount of use to his team alive, parked here back on the map border. In fact, his chief contribution to the team thus far has been to indulge in a frank and spirited exchange of views with the various different artillery players on his team as to their relative worth as human beings. This philosophical discussion is interrupted briefly when the E3 takes the opportunity to finish off a low-health enemy Centurion and then almost immediately is hit by the enemy Object 261 artillery, which does nothing to improve his already low opinion of artillery players in general. An opinion that is only reinforced when the Object 261 player on his own team, at this point probably sick and tired of being called a homo, decides to take matters into his own hands and attempt to shut this guy up permanently. But the shot misses, goes into the rocks, and the only real damage, other than the splash, is to the E3's already fragile temper. Now, I'm not condoning what the Object 261 did there. I mean, yeah, he was provoked, but he's acting like an arsehole, and doing absolutely nothing to persuade the E3 driver that artillery players are not, in fact, the lowest form of life on Earth. An opinion which is further reinforced when he fires again, stuns him again, and then, for reasons known only to himself, the GWE100 artillery player on the team also decides that the E3 needs to be persuaded to move from his camping spot. Somewhat unsurprisingly, it's at around about this point where the E3 decides that he's had quite enough of this shit, and decides to take matters into his own hands. Starting with the Object 261. Luckily for the Geschützwagen E100, he's not in direct line of fire, or he would almost certainly have been next. And in any case, he's got slightly more immediate problems as he's forced to defend himself from an incoming enemy FV-4005, which he manages to do quite handily. For a brief period, there is an actual enemy tank over there for the E3 to shoot at, but he's not in any rush to poke out from behind the cover of the rocks where he's still getting hit by the enemy artillery. So it's down to the GWE100 to secure yet another kill, for his fourth kill so far in this game. But while that E3 wasn't interested in poking out in order to take a shot at the enemy TVP, because hey, why bother wasting ammunition on enemy tanks when there's friendly artillery that needs shooting, and he has not forgotten about the shot the GWE100 splashed onto the rocks next to him several minutes ago, and in fact has just been patiently waiting for the opportunity to do that. And having turned blue, with his work now complete, the E3 spends the next 2 minutes sitting in the rocks, waiting for the match to end in a draw. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, in the words of the legendary Klaus Kellerman, I put it to you, just who exactly was the biggest arsehole? It's a tough one, I know, there were so many to choose from. And after that shocking display, you probably need a bit of cheering up. So here's Bora Boom in the Churchill Mark 7, in an absolute ruffle stomp here on Himmelsdorf. Now the Churchill 7 is not a particularly popular tank, and I have to admit, for pretty good reasons. On paper, it has very strong armour, up to 152mm of frontal armour. And while that's technically true, it's only got 152mm in certain places. The front is riddled with weak spots. Speaking of weak spots, there's a very large weak spot in the turret. This thing doesn't have a gun mantlet, so around the gun there's basically a hole in the armour. Now you can get away with that more often than not in a tier 6 battle. When you're fighting lots of tier 4s and 5s and even tier 6s who are relatively new to the game, not that experienced, may not have come across too many Mark 7 Churchills before and have no idea about the various different weaknesses. Not so much in a tier 8 game, where the players are going to be more experienced and, well, don't really need to know about any obvious weaknesses because they just have guns that have the kind of penetration that makes the armour on this thing almost completely irrelevant anyway. Although, even when you're top tier in a Mark 7 Churchill, as Bora Boom is here, you're still going to come across enemies who, whether through luck or judgment, like that 25 TP down there, are still going to find that weak spot in the front of your turret. Whether the 25 TP knows that that's where he should aim, or whether that's all he can shoot at because that's all that Bora Boom is exposing, is academic. He is actually managing to do damage. And then of course, even at tier 6, you're going to run into things like that T150 down there, which is armed with a 107mm gun that doesn't really care whether or not it impacts on wherever your armour is strongest or not, because it's got enough penetration to go right through it anyway, like a hot knife through butter. And that is not something that you can say of the gun on the Churchill Mark 7. There are a wide variety of mostly 75 or 77mm guns available on the Mark 7 Churchill, and while they do have some good features, primarily accuracy and rate of fire, penetration and alpha damage are not on the list. Even firing gold, Bora Boom is having to aim for weak spots on that T150 over there. And it's this inconsistent armour, as well as the terrible slow speed of the Churchill Mark 7, and the gun that, while it does have a blistering rate of fire and is very accurate, has very average penetration and extremely low alpha damage, are all factors that combine to ensure that while it's certainly possible to do well in a tier 6 battle in the Mark 7 Churchill, because you're top tier, and you're probably going to be fighting enemies that don't know about your armour weaknesses, this tank does not up tier very well at all. It doesn't do well in tier 7 games, and it's pretty much just an experience and credit pinata in a tier 8 game. Now those are not charges that you can level at the T150 down there, which is still a reasonably competitive tank even in a tier 8 battle, because it has armour that with careful angling can still work even against tier 8 tanks, or at least some of them, and a gun that allows you to fight in a tier 7 battle, and even most of the time in a tier 8 battle, without requiring you to play the game with your elbow resting on the 2 key. Although ironically, even in this tier 6 battle, that T150 has just loaded the gold, probably because he realised that if Bora Boom managed to snipe one of his weak spots again, he was going to die, and that is in fact exactly what happened. Nevertheless, it's still interesting to note that in what are technically 2 competitive tier 6 tanks, one of them had to load gold and hit weak spots 7 or 8 times in order to get the kill, whereas all the other one had to do was pretty much just aim in his general direction and hit him 3 times. Still, look on the bright side. There's not much of a bright side to look forward to, because he's now only one of 2 tanks left alive on his team, but with the death of the T150 on the enemy team, Bora Boom is now top dog. And he's now the last tank left alive on his team. And he's been caught with a T-34-85 behind him, and that 85mm gun, if it had hit, would have been entirely capable of penetrating this machine's side armour. But the T-34-85 whiffed the shot into the rubble. He's going for the kill on the tank destroyer, he's got him. And to be fair to the T-34-85 player, he is playing well. I mean, yeah, alright, he's firing gold. But so's Bora Boom. We're not here to criticise. He is keeping the tank angled. And Bora Boom, even with the gold loaded, is pretty much having to aim for weak spots against even an equivalent tier medium tank. He's managed to get him though, but that's left him on very, very low health, and there are still 5 enemies. One of whom is a KV-222. A Soviet premium tier 6 heavy tank that has a lot of similarities with a Mark 7 Churchill. Very strong hull, because that is basically a KV-3 hull, yes, a tier 7 heavy tank, but a relatively weak turret. A lot like the Mark 7 Churchill. Luckily, because Bora Boom was in fact at the beginning of the battle advising his team that if they see the KV-220 they were to shoot at the turret, he knows all about the weaknesses of that tank, and he's able to take him down. 4 enemies. 3 enemies. Where's the M7 going? It's dead. Hit from the rear. Oh, this isn't good. This isn't good at all. No. Is he going to be able to get the tank turned around in time? Yeah, that guy didn't want to die. So he was able to get the tank turned around. And... oh, that horrible gun depression robbed him of the kill. 2 enemy tanks left. They're both one-shots. Although the Matilda does have some pretty tough armour. And Bora Boom is out of premium. Although the Matilda's armour is good in a tier 4 battle. Not so much in a tier 6 battle. A very similar problem to what the Churchill Mark 7 experiences when it's fighting in a tier 8 game. He's able to keep the Matilda immobilised, and the Matilda's gun has not cleared the corner. Oh, hang on a second. You sneaky little Swedish bugger, I see you there. Bang, you're dead. Here comes the Matilda. Doesn't have the shot, but Bora Boom does. Straight through the side armour, under the gun barrel of the dead M7. Match over. 10 kills for Bora Boom in the Mark 7 Churchill. But wait, there's more. Yes, we're not done yet. I know you don't deserve it, but what can I say? I'm in a good mood today. I'm feeling generous. There is one Soviet tier 6 heavy tank that cares even less than the T150 if it gets up tiered into a tier 7 or even a tier 8 game. What can this mean, Jingles? Tell us your secrets. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that can mean only one thing. Check your watches, it's KV 2 o'clock. This is Archileticus, in everybody's favourite perfectly balanced Tier 6 Soviet heavy tank, the KV-2. He's divisioned up with a very unfortunate looking Cromwell and a slightly less unfortunate looking Type 64, who were probably both wishing that they had decided to drive their KV-2 as well, because this is a Tier 8 battle here on the airfield map. Now, it's not that much of a Tier 8 battle, it's the 357 matchmaking. There are 3 Tier 8s on each side, 5 Tier 7s on each side, and 7 very unfortunate Tier 6s, who were all probably wishing they were driving KV-2s as well. Uncle Jingles, I'm new to this party, said almost nobody. What makes the KV-2 so special? Well, that's a very good question, and I'm glad you asked. The reason the KV-2 is so utterly hilarious is because of things like this. I swear that shit never gets old. It's this 152mm howitzer. Loaded with high explosive shells, is capable of doing over 900 damage per shot. Of course it has to penetrate, but, well, it's high explosive. Even if it doesn't penetrate, it's going to do a couple of hundred, wreck a whole bunch of modules, send a couple of your crewmen to the gulag, and, well, generally pretty much just ruin your day. It doesn't matter how much Wargaming mess around with World of Tanks, there is pretty much nothing they could do, short of removing this 152mm howitzer, and if they did that we'd riot, that would make the KV-2 any less glorious to play. Now, while the memes about the 152mm howitzer on the KV-2 are a matter of public record at this point, I mean, I've seen battles where KV-2s have intentionally fail-platooned their way into Tier 10 battles, and thanks to the power of the derp, they've managed to finish top of the team on both damage done and experience earned. And to be perfectly honest, I think at this point there have been so many KV-2 troll montage videos on YouTube that nobody can possibly still be surprised that even when it's bottom tier, the KV-2 is perfectly capable of doing obscene amounts of damage. But what may still have the power to shock you is the amount of shells that a KV-2 is capable of bouncing, even shells fired at it, from a tank destroyer armed with a Tier 10 120mm anti-tank gun designed specifically to punch through the hardened fortifications of the Siegfried line, like that T-28 up there. The KV-2 may be a very strong tank, but it only has 75mm of frontal armour, and that T-28 up there is armed with a gun that does 400 average damage, and has 248mm of penetration. 297 if you're a gold spamming noob who doesn't know where to aim and simply plays with their elbow resting on their 2 key. Wow, those are some lucky bouncers. Luck had nothing to do with it, comrade. This is KV-2. It is the strongest of strong socialist tanks. It is a little known fact that armour of KV-2 is fashioned from the Stalinwood tree, a tree that grows exclusively along the banks of the River Volga. Stalinwood is of course most commonly known for its use in the construction of Soviet aircraft in War Thunder, but has many useful applications also in the construction of tanks. And as you can quite plainly see, is easily capable of defeating the most decadent and capitalist of filthy Western ammunition types. Well, thank you for that assessment, Vladimir. Some may call bias, but well, it's pretty hard to argue with that kind of evidence. The KV-2. It's a very strong tank. And that's pretty much it for today. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you to everybody who sent their replays in. And as always, take care. And I'll catch you next time.